You wake up in total darkness. The air is so thick with the stench of human waste and rotting flesh that you vomit immediately. You can't stand. The ceiling is 4 feet high. You can't sit. The floor is covered in feces and corpses. You're chained at the neck to 20 other prisoners, and when one of them dies, this is the Tullianum, Rome's most infamous prison. And if you were a prisoner in ancient Rome, this is where you'd spend your final hours before execution. Modern prison is a vacation compared to what Rome did to prisoners. Here's why you, with your modern immune system, zero pain tolerance, and complete lack of survival skills, wouldn't last a single day in Rome's prison system. Hour 1. You're thrown into the Tullianum and immediately realize you're going to die. You've been captured in battle or convicted of a crime against the state. Guards drag you through Rome's streets while citizens spit on you and throw stones. You're taken to the Tullianum, an underground dungeon built in the 7th century BC, still in use during the Republican Empire. The only entrance is a hole in the ceiling. Guards lower you down with ropes. The hole closes. You're in complete darkness. The Tullianum was 12 feet wide and 20 feet long. At any given time, it held 50 prisoners. That's less than 5 square feet per person. You literally cannot lie down. You cannot sit without sitting on another person or a corpse. The ceiling is so low you're hunched over, crushing your spine and making breathing difficult. But here's what kills you first: the air. The Tullianum had zero ventilation except that single ceiling hole, which is now closed. 50 people breathing in a sealed underground chamber creates a carbon dioxide buildup that would make you unconscious within hours. Historical accounts from Sallust describe prisoners gasping for air and suffocating before execution. You're not being executed yet. You're just slowly asphyxiating while you wait. Modern humans are adapted to clean air with 21% oxygen and 0.04% CO2. In the Tullianum, CO2 levels would exceed 3% within a few hours, enough to cause severe respiratory distress, dizziness, and loss of consciousness. Ancient Romans were physically tougher and adapted to harsher conditions. You're not. Your soft modern body starts shutting down immediately. Hour 3. Disease exposure that your immune system has never encountered. You're chained to other prisoners. The man to your left has dysentery. He's been defecating on himself for 3 days. The woman to your right has a festering wound crawling with maggots. The floor is ankle-deep in human waste that hasn't been cleaned in weeks. You have open cuts from being dragged through the streets. Every pathogen in this biological nightmare is entering your bloodstream. The Tullianum had no sanitation, no toilets, no drainage, no cleaning. Prisoners relieved themselves where they sat. The waste accumulated until guards eventually shoveled it out, maybe once a week if you were lucky. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery, and sepsis were guaranteed. But here's the brutal reality. Your immune system has never seen these ancient pathogens. Modern sanitation eliminated most of these diseases from your environment. You've been vaccinated against some, but not the specific ancient strains that existed 2,000 years ago. When typhoid enters your system through that cut on your arm, your body has no antibodies, no immune memory, no defense. Ancient Romans who survived childhood had immune systems battle-hardened by constant disease exposure. You don't. Hour 3. Bacteria enters your bloodstream. You develop a fever. Hour 12. You're delirious. The Romans have no antibiotics. You die from infection before they can execute you. Hour 5. Starvation and dehydration, because they don't feed prisoners. You haven't eaten since arrest. You're desperately thirsty. You ask the guards for water. They laugh. Roman prisons didn't provide food or water to prisoners. That was your family's responsibility. If your family brought you food, you ate. You starved. You're a foreigner with no family in Rome. Nobody's bringing you anything. The average person can survive 3 days without water. You're sweating from fever, losing fluids to disease, and your body is in crisis mode, burning through calories to fight infection. But here's what makes it worse. The psychological torture of watching other prisoners receive food while you starve. Some prisoners had wealthy families who bribed guards to bring meals. Those prisoners ate in front of you while you had nothing. The psychological breakdown from this is as damaging as the physical starvation. Dehydration symptoms appear after 6–12 hours without water in hot conditions. Severe dehydration, causing kidney failure and death, occurs after 24–36 hours. You're at hour 5. By hour 12, you'll be hallucinating from dehydration. Your kidneys are shutting down, even if you somehow avoided infection. Thirst would kill you by day 2. Hour 8. The screaming starts and doesn't stop. The Tullianum is directly below the Capitoline Hill, where executions happen. Above you, prisoners are being strangled, beheaded, and thrown from the Tarpeian Rock, a cliff where traitors are hurled to their deaths. You hear everything: the screams, the begging, the sound of bodies hitting rocks. You know you're next. Humans aren't designed to listen to their own species being slaughtered while knowing they're about to experience the same fate. Modern psychology calls this anticipatory trauma, the psychological damage from knowing torture or death is coming. Roman prisoners experienced days or weeks of this psychological torture before execution. But here's what ancient sources confirm. Prisoners would scream, pray to gods, bang their heads against walls trying to knock themselves unconscious, or attempt to strangle themselves with their chains to avoid execution. Cicero wrote about prisoners in the Tullianum, driven mad by fear of death. You think you're tough enough to handle this. You're not. Nobody is. Hour 1. Fear. Hour 4. Panic. Hour 8. When the executions start above you, you enter a psychological state called learned helplessness, where your brain understands that nothing you do matters. You're going to die, and there's no escape. Modern humans who experience this level of psychological trauma develop PTSD that lasts for life, if they survive. You won't survive, so you just get to experience the terror without the aftermath. Hour 12. The gentle prisoners try to kill you. You're chained to 20–30 other prisoners. Some are murderers, rapists, and violent criminals. Others are political prisoners or captured enemy soldiers. All of them are desperate. In darkness, you feel hands on your throat. Someone's trying to strangle you to take your position against the wall where there's slightly more air circulation. When you put desperate people in life-or-death conditions with zero oversight, inside the prison, there were no rules, no protection, no guards. If someone decided to kill you to improve their own odds of survival, they could, and nobody would stop them. But here's the historical evidence. Accounts from Livy and Sallust describe prisoners killing each other for space, for food brought by families, or simply because madness from confinement made them violent. You're a modern person who's probably never been in a real physical fight. When a Roman soldier or hardened criminal decides to kill you, you have zero chance. Against a healthy ancient Roman who spent their entire lives in physical labor, fighting, and harsh conditions, you lose every physical confrontation, tougher, and have zero moral compunctions about killing to survive. You die from violence before the state even executes you. Hour 16. The execution methods you're trying not to think about. You know you're going to be executed. You just don't know how. Will you be strangled in the Tullianum? Thrown from the cliff? Beheaded? Crucified? Fed to animals in the arena? The uncertainty is its own torture. Hour 20. You realize nobody's coming to save you. Maybe your family will bribe officials. Maybe there'll be a pardon. Maybe there's been a mistake. There hasn't been. Nobody's coming. Roman bureaucracy doesn't make mistakes. When they imprison you, it's because you're supposed to be imprisoned. When they execute you, it's because you're supposed to die. Roman law had no presumption of innocence, no appeals process, no habeas corpus. If a magistrate decided you were guilty, you were guilty. If the Senate condemned you, you were condemned. There were no lawyers arguing your case, no judges reviewing evidence, no possibility of overturning the decision. But here's the historical reality. Some of Rome's greatest figures died in the Tullianum. Jugurtha, a king, the Catiline conspirators, Roman citizens, Vercingetorix, a national hero to his people, paraded in triumph, then strangled. If Rome executed kings and heroes without mercy, they're certainly not sparing you. Hour 1, you had hope. Hour D's, you had desperate hope. Hour Vaint, hope dies, and with it, your will to survive. You stop fighting the infection. You stop trying to breathe the bad air. You stop resisting. This is when most prisoners died, not from execution but from giving up. The body follows the mind, and when your mind accepts death, your body shuts down. Hour 24. If you've made it this far, you're already dead. It's been 24 hours. You've had maybe one sip of contaminated water from condensation on the walls. You have sepsis from infected wounds. You're severely dehydrated. You've been breathing contaminated air for a full day. You're covered in human waste. You've been psychologically tortured by execution sounds. You've fought off or been beaten by other prisoners. Your body is shutting down. The human body can't survive these combined stressors. Individually, any one of these conditions, starvation, dehydration, infection, asphyxiation, psychological trauma, is survivable short-term. Combined, they're lethal within 24-48 hours. Modern survival rates in similar conditions during WWE, prisoners in comparable conditions, underground bunkers with no sanitation, minimal food, water, disease, had 50% mortality rates within the first week. You don't have a week, you have one day. And WWE prisoners were generally healthier and tougher than modern humans. A modern U.S. maximum security prisoner gets 3 meals per day, clean water, medical care, sanitation, ventilation, and legal representation. A Tullianum prisoner got none of those things. Not because Rome was uniquely cruel. Most ancient civilizations treated prisoners this way. Prison wasn't meant to rehabilitate. It was temporary holding before execution or enslavement. Why ancient Romans could survive this and you can't? Romans who survived to adulthood had already survived childhood diseases that killed 40% of their peers. They had immune systems forged by constant pathogen exposure. They could tolerate pain, hunger, and thirst at levels modern humans can't comprehend because they experienced those conditions regularly. Starvation wasn't a crisis. It was a periodic reality during sieges, famines, and military campaigns. Romans were culturally conditioned to accept death as normal and expected. Life expectancy was 25-30 years. In war, in the arena, they didn't have the modern psychological expectation of safety and longevity that you have. When faced with execution, they could accept it in ways you can't. Roman prisoners often knew they were going to die from the moment of arrest. There was no false hope of trials, appeals, or clemency. This paradoxically made it easier. They could mentally prepare for death rather than oscillating between hope and despair like you would. But here's the critical distinction. Even Romans died rapidly in the Tullian. It was specifically designed to be lethal. The Catiline conspirators were executed within 24 hours of imprisonment because keeping prisoners alive longer was difficult, even for tough ancient Romans. If they couldn't survive long in these conditions, you, soft, modern, and unprepared, have zero chance. The brutal math of your survival hour, 1 netilesa. Psychological trauma from conditions, initial infection from disease exposure, survival probability, 70%, most die later. Not immediately. Hour 6-12. Dehydration symptoms, fever from infection, psychological breakdown from hearing executions. Survival probability, 40%. Hour 12, Ortes 18. Severe dehydration, advancing infection, possible violence from other prisoners. Survival probability, 15%. Hour 18-24. Organ failure from combined dehydration/infection/starvation, psychological collapse. Survival probability 5% beyond 24 hours. If you've somehow survived this long, you're executed anyway. Survival probability 0%. The average prisoner in the Tullianum survived 2 to 5 days before execution or death from conditions. You wouldn't make it past day one. Not because you're weak, because the conditions are designed to be unsurvivable for modern humans who've never experienced anything remotely this harsh. You think you're tough because you've survived difficult situations. You haven't survived anything like this. Nobody in the modern world has. The worst day of your life is better than the average day for a Tullianum prisoner. And their worst day, the day of execution after days of torture, is beyond what your mind can imagine or your body can endure. If you were a prisoner in ancient Rome, you'd be dead within 24 hours. Not executed, just dead from the accumulated trauma of conditions your body and mind weren't built to survive. The execution would be a mercy compared to dying slowly from infection, dehydration, and despair in that underground hell. That's just what the historical evidence and biological reality tell us about what happens when you take a modern human and drop them into the ancient world's worst nightmare.